The rain had not been in the forecast. That was the first thing Marigold Ashcombe thought as the storm broke over the Berkshire Road, sheets of water hammering the carriage roof with such violence that the driver's voice went unheard above it. The second thing she thought, with the disorienting clarity of someone whose plans were unraveling in real time, was that she would arrive at Thornwell Park, soaked through to the skin, with her hair half down and her dignity in tatters, and that the man she had spent 3 years, carefully, deliberately not thinking about, would be the one to see her like that. She pressed her gloved hand against the carriage window. Outside, the world had gone the color of wet slate, and the great wrought iron gates of Thornwell Park rose out of the gloom like something from a Gothic novel. She had not been here in 3 years, 3 years since she had stood in the foyer of this very estate, 18 years old, pretending not to notice that the Duke of Halverston had refused to look at her once over the entire course of a 4-day house party. 3 years since she had decided, with the quiet, ferocious resolve of a girl who had been in love with the same man since she was 12 and was tired of being invisible to him, that she would go to Vienna with her aunt, study music, learn to laugh at things that were not him, and come home a different woman. She had done all 3. She thought she had done all 3. Now, watching the gates of Thornwell rise toward her through the rain, she was not so certain about the 3rd. Miss Ashcombe? The driver had appeared at the carriage door. His Grace's man came down to meet us, miss. They've been watching the road. He says you're to come inside straight away. Marigold's stomach performed something cold and unwelcome. My brother is here? No, miss. Lord Ashcombe has not yet returned. Just his Grace. She had been counting on her brother. Cassian was the buffer, the hinge, the noisy, golden, beloved presence that filled every room he entered. He had written to her in Vienna, his hand sprawling across the page in that boyish way that had not changed since they were children. Mari, come home. Halverston is throwing the autumn shoot for me before I sail. You must be there. He insists upon it. And so do I. He insists upon it. She had read those words a dozen times before she answered. The driver was offering his hand. She took it. She stepped down into the rain, and the cold of it struck her so hard she nearly gasped. The doors of Thornwell Park stood open. Light spilled from them in a long gold rectangle across the wet stone. And in the doorway, framed against that light with his hands clasped behind his back and his face entirely unreadable, stood Vesper Halverston, the 7th Duke of his line, her brother's oldest friend, and the only man she had ever loved. He had not changed, or rather, he had, in the way that men do between 31 and 34. There was a sharpness to his jaw she did not remember, a thread of silver at one temple that had not been there before, a stillness about him that was new. But the rest was the same. The dark hair, the gray eyes that had never given anything away, the mouth that did not smile, even now, even as he watched her stand in the rain on his doorstep. You will catch your death, Miss Ashcombe. That was the first thing he said to her after 3 years. Not welcome home. Not how was Vienna. Not even her given name. Miss Ashcombe, as if she were a stranger. Your Grace. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. Forgive me. The storm. Inside. It was not an invitation. It was a command, low and absolute, and her body responded before her pride could object. She climbed the last 3 steps. She crossed the threshold. The warmth of the house struck her like a blow. Mrs. Penhallow. He did not raise his voice. The housekeeper appeared instantly. A small woman with iron-gray hair and a face that softened the moment she saw Marigold. Miss Ashcombe is to be taken upstairs. The blue suite. A bath, dry clothing, hot tea. And Mrs. Penhallow. His voice did not change, and yet something in it shifted. She is not to be disturbed by anyone. Anyone at all. Until I send word. Yes, Your Grace. Marigold turned to look at him then, fully for the first time. The look he gave her in return held only for half a second before he turned his face away as though it cost him, was a look she had never seen on his face before. It wasn't coldness. It was not indifference. It was the look of a man who had braced for something and discovered, in the moment of impact, that the bracing had not been enough. Vesper. His name came out of her mouth before she could stop it. Quiet. Unthinking. The way she had said it when she was a child, before he had been the Duke of anything. He did not turn back. "Mrs. Penhallow," he said. "Take her up." And then he was gone, walking down the long corridor away from her, his shoulders set in a line that Marigold suddenly, terribly recognized, because she had seen that line 100 times in her life and had never, until this moment, understood what it meant. He was not walking away because he did not care. He was walking away because he could not afford, in front of his housekeeper and his footman, to do anything else. She stood in the foyer with rain pooling at her feet and watched him go. She climbed the stairs of Thornwell Park, with her heart beating very strangely. 3 years in Vienna, she thought. 3 years of telling herself she had outgrown him, and he had not even let her into the foyer before everything she had built came apart in her hands. The blue suite was the one she had been given as a child. Marigold realized it the moment the door opened. The same pale wallpaper printed with cornflowers, the same writing desk by the window, the same little porcelain shepherdess on the mantel with one chipped finger that she had once cried over, certain she had broken it herself. None of it had been changed, not in 3 years. Not, she suspected, in 10. She let Mrs. Penhallow strip her out of her ruined traveling clothes without a word. She let 2 housemaids bring up a bath that steamed in the cold air. She drank the tea that was put into her hands. Her body did all of this, while her mind sat somewhere a long way off, turning over, again and again, the look on Vesper Halverston's face when she had spoken his name. "Mrs. Penhallow." Marigold sat up against the pillows. "How long has His Grace been at Thornwell? I had thought he was in London." "He came down a fortnight ago, miss, to prepare the house for the shoot. A fortnight, for a shoot that begins in 4 days. Mrs. Penhallow folded her hands over her apron. "His Grace is most particular, miss, about the readying of his houses." It was a perfectly proper answer that said nothing whatsoever. A duke did not come down to the country a fortnight before a shoot. A duke who came down a fortnight early, alone, and watched the road from his own front door for the carriage of his best friend's sister. She did not finish the thought. "Thank you, Mrs. Penhallow," she said. "I shall sleep now." The door closed softly. Marigold lay in the great curtained bed, with the rain still beating against the windows, and she did not sleep at all. She did not know what hour it was when she rose. The fire had burned low. The rain had stopped. The house had gone quiet in the way that great houses go quiet at night. That particular hush of carpeted corridors and shut doors and clocks ticking in distant rooms. She slipped a wrapper over her nightdress. She did not light a candle. She knew the corridors of Thornwell Park the way she knew the corridors of her own body. She had run wild through this house every summer of her childhood, with Cassian shouting behind her and Vesper following at his more measured pace, the 3 of them inseparable from the time she was 6, and Cassian was 9, and Vesper was 12, until the summer she had turned 16, and something had changed, and Vesper had stopped looking at her at all. Her feet took her down the east corridor, past the long gallery, down the stairs to the library, because the light beneath the library door was the only light still burning anywhere in Thornwell Park at this hour. She put her hand on the door. She paused. She opened it anyway. He was at the desk by the window. He had not heard her, or he had heard her, and chosen not to acknowledge it, which was more like him. And so for a long moment, she stood in the doorway and simply looked at him. He had taken off his coat. His shirt sleeves were turned back at the wrists. There was a glass at his elbow that had been emptied and not refilled. He was not reading. He was not writing. He was simply sitting with his head in his hands. And she had never in her life seen Vesper Halverston sit with his head in his hands. Vesper. He went very still. He did not lift his head. Go back to bed, Marigold. Her name. He had said her name. After 3 years of Miss Ashcombe in his letters, and Miss Ashcombe in the foyer, he had said Marigold, and his voice had broken on the second syllable. She stepped into the room. She closed the door behind her. No. Marigold. Now he looked up. His face was the face she had seen in the foyer, except that he had stopped braced. He had stopped pretending. The work of being the Duke of Halverston had come down off him like a coat sliding from a hook. Go upstairs, please. I am asking you. You watch the road for me. Marigold. Mrs. Penhallow said you came down a fortnight ago, alone, to a house you do not need to ready, for a shoot you do not care about, because my brother wrote and told you I was coming home. He did not answer. Vesper. Look at me. He looked at her. The look in his eyes was the look of a man who had been holding a door closed for 10 years against something on the other side, and the door had just given way. You should not have come back, he said. The clock on the mantel struck the half hour. Why not? She said. And from the corridor outside, very faintly, came the sound of carriage wheels on wet gravel, the sound of horses, the sound of a man's voice, raised and laughing, calling out to the grooms, a voice she would have known anywhere, in any country, at any hour of the night. Cassian had come home. Vesper was on his feet in one motion. He crossed the room before she could draw breath. He caught her by the wrist, not hard, but absolutely in the way a man catches a thing he cannot afford to drop, and his face, when he looked down at her, was white. He cannot find you in this room. Do you understand me? Vesper. Marigold. His voice was a thread. If he finds you in this room, in your night clothes, with me, I will lose him. Do you understand? I will lose your brother, and so will you. Then let me go. I'm trying. He was not letting go of her wrist. She looked down at his hand. She looked up at his face, and she said, very quietly, the thing she had been afraid to say for 10 years. How long? He closed his eyes. The carriage wheels were on the drive. Cassian was shouting for the front door to be opened. How long, Vesper? Marigold, please. How long? His hand opened. Her wrist came free. He stepped back from her, as though stepping back from a fire, and he said, in a voice she had never heard from him in her life, since you were 16. She did not remember climbing the stairs. She remembered afterward only fragments, the cold of the banister beneath her palm, the sound of Cassian downstairs greeting Vesper with a great noisy embrace, and a good God, man, you look like death. And the sound, beneath that, of Vesper laughing. Laughing as though nothing had happened. The voice he used for her brother. The voice that fooled everyone. And Cassian had no idea. Cassian, who had never once suspected that his sister had been silently in love with that same friend since she was 12, and that his friend, since you were 16. She closed the door of the blue suite behind her. She sat down on the edge of the bed. She did not cry. Every memory she possessed of Vesper Halverston since the summer she was 16 had been a lie. Or not a lie. A construction. A performance. 10 years of small, careful, immaculate cruelty, executed by a man who did not know how to do anything imperfectly, and which she had read every time as indifference. The way he had not danced with her at her presentation ball. The way he had sent her brother to escort her home from the Whitlocks in the snow and not come himself. The way he had stopped one afternoon in the rose garden when she was 17, in the middle of a sentence, and walked away from her without finishing it. The way he had left the room every time when her name was mentioned at his own dinner table. The way he had never, Not once in 3 years, written to her in Vienna. He had been hiding from her for 10 years. She must have slept, because she woke. It was past 9. The sun was up. She rose. She dressed in the simplest of the gowns Mrs. Penhallow had hung in the wardrobe. Pale gray, high-necked, severe, and she went down to face them both. "Maury!" Cassian was on his feet the instant she came through the breakfast room door, and he had her in his arms before she could draw breath. He smelled of horses and rain, and the particular cologne he had been wearing since he was 18. God, look at you. Vienna has made you elegant. Halverston, doesn't she look elegant? She looks well. Vesper was at the sideboard. He did not turn. He is being modest. Cassian held her at arm's length, beaming. He has been pacing this house for a fortnight. Anyone would think it was his sister coming home. Cassian, Vesper's voice, quiet. Let her sit down. Cassian pressed a kiss to her forehead and steered her to a chair, fussing over the coffee, the eggs, asking her 3 questions before she could answer the first. Marigold sat in the chair he gave her and looked across the table at Vesper Halverston, who was buttering a piece of toast with the precision of a man who could not afford to look up. She would not, she thought. She would not let him do this to her again. Cassian. May I speak with His Grace alone for a moment after breakfast? On a matter concerning Aunt Imogen's affairs in Vienna. I have a letter from her solicitor I cannot read without help. Vesper's hand stopped, very briefly, on the butter knife. Of course. Cassian, who suspected nothing in this world or any other, beamed at her. Halverston is the cleverest fellow I know with a contract. She did not look at Vesper. She heard, in the silence on the other side of the table, the precise sound of a man understanding that he had been outmaneuvered. They went into the small study off the morning room. He closed the door. He did not sit. Neither did she. There is no letter, he said. No. Marigold, I have a proposal for you, Your Grace. That stopped him. The use of the title after last night, the flatness of her voice. She had thought, climbing the stairs in the dark, that she would come into this room and weep, or shout, or beg him to explain himself. She did not feel any of those things now. She felt instead a cold and unfamiliar clarity. I am listening. My brother sails for Calcutta in 6 weeks. He will be gone 3 years, perhaps 4. He has asked you, I imagine, to look in on me while he is away. A pause. Yes. He has asked you, in fact, to be a kind of guardian to me. Yes. And you agreed. Marigold. You agreed, Vesper, knowing what you told me last night. You agreed to be responsible for me for 3 years in my brother's stead, knowing I could not refuse him. His voice was rough, without giving him a reason, and the only reason I could have given him was the one I cannot give him. No, she drew breath. No, you could not. Which is why I am proposing this. She walked to the window. She did not want to be looking at his face when she said it. For the next 6 weeks until my brother sails, you and I will conduct ourselves as we have always conducted ourselves. You will be his oldest friend. I will be his sister. Nothing has been said between us. Nothing has been heard. Do you understand me? Nothing has been heard. Marigold, and after he sails. She turned. She made herself look at him. After he sails, you will find me a husband. He went still. No. Yes. You will introduce me to every eligible man within reach of London. You will see me suitably matched and married before my brother returns from Calcutta. And in doing so, you will release me from the last 10 years, from whatever you thought you were sparing me by being cruel. We will neither of us speak of last night again, not to one another, not to anyone, ever. Marigold. Do you agree, Your Grace? The clock on the study mantel ticked. Vesper Halverston stood in the middle of his own study with his hands at his sides, and his face entirely undefended, and he looked at her, properly, fully, for what she understood was the first time in 10 years, and she saw in his face the exact instant he understood that she had given him the only weapon by which she could be lost to him forever, and that she was asking him, deliberately, and with full knowledge, to take it up. "Yes," he said. It was barely a word. "Then we are agreed." She walked past him to the door. Her hand was on the handle when he spoke again, behind her, very low. "Marigold, yes. You do not know what you are asking of me." She did not turn. "Yes, I do," she said. "I am asking exactly what you asked of yourself 10 years ago. I am asking you to bear it." She opened the door. She left him standing in the study, and in the morning room, where her brother was on his second cup of coffee, entirely oblivious, she sat down and smiled at him, and asked him to pass the marmalade, and began the longest 6 weeks of her life. The shoot began on a Tuesday. Marigold woke before dawn to the sound of horses being brought round, the soft chuff of breath in the cold air below her window. She had heard this sound 100 times in her life. The morning of a Thornwell shoot was a sound she could have identified in her sleep. But she had never lain in bed and listened to it as a woman who had bargained, 2 days before, for her own future across a desk from the man who arranged the horses. She rose. She dressed in the russet wool gown Mrs. Penhallow had hung out for her, and she went down. The long room at Thornwell was the great gallery on the south front, all glass and morning light, with a fire at each end. Cassian was already there, in his shooting tweeds. 3 other gentlemen were with him. Lord Westley, who Marigold had known since she was small. Old Mr. Coomber, who managed Vesper's southern estates. And a young man she did not know. Dark-haired, fine-featured, with a quick mouth and quicker eyes, who rose the moment she entered the room. "Mari." Cassian beamed at her. "Come and meet Devereux. He's been begging for the introduction since Halverston told him you were home." The young man bowed. "Miss Ashcombe, forgive my impatience. Your brother has talked of nothing else for a week." "That is a slander," Cassian said happily. "I have talked of horses for at least an hour each day." Marigold gave Mr. Devereux her hand. He was, she observed, exactly the kind of man one's brother brought home from London. Younger son of an earl, perhaps. Good family, no fortune to speak of. Charming in the way that men who must make their own way are charming. "Mr. Devereux." "Lucienne, please. Your brother and I have been at school together since we were 9. "Halverston," said the voice from the doorway, "wants to know whether anyone in this house intends to actually shoot today." He had come in behind her. She did not turn at once. She made herself unfold her napkin, lay it across her lap, and only then look up. And when she did, she found that he had already taken his seat at the head of the table, and was speaking to Mr. Coomer about a fence on the north meadow, and that he had not looked at her at all. Good, she thought. This is what we agreed. It hurt anyway. Miss Ashcombe will not be neglected, I hope, Lucienne Devereux said. On the contrary. Vesper. He was buttering bread. He did not lift his eyes. Miss Ashcombe expressed an interest before your arrival in the new plantings on the South Walk. I have given orders that the head gardener be at her disposal this morning. She had expressed no such interest. He had invented it, invented an errand to take her out of the house while the men were in the field. And she understood that this was the shape her next 6 weeks were going to take. He was going to manage her, the way he managed his estates, his stables, his dinner parties, with absolute invisible competence, and from a distance she would not be permitted to close. How thoughtful of His Grace, she said. His Grace is always thoughtful, said Lucienne Devereux, smiling at her over the rim of his coffee cup. It is one of his less endurable qualities. Vesper did not look up. The gentlemen rose at 8. They went out into the cold blue morning with their dogs and their guns and their breath visible on the air. Cassian kissed her on the top of the head as he passed. Lucien Devereaux gave her a small private bow at the door that she felt rather than saw, and Vesper went out of the room without looking at her. She sat at the long table in the empty gallery for a long time after they had gone, and she thought, with a clarity that surprised her, "He is going to ruin himself doing this. He cannot even look at me. He will give himself away in the first week, and Cassian will see, and the whole thing will come down." And then she thought, "Unless I help him." She rose. She went upstairs and put on her walking boots and her warmest pelisse, and she went out alone into the south walk, where the head gardener was waiting for her. "Mr. Trewin." She held out her hand to him. "Forgive me. His Grace tells me you are going to show me the new plantings. I shall pretend to be a very good pupil, if you will be patient with me." The old man's face cracked into a smile. "Aye, miss. I'll be patient with ye." She walked the south walk for an hour, in the cold. At the end of the hour, she went back into the house and sat down at the writing desk, in the blue suite, and wrote the first letter. "Your Grace, the south walk is very fine. Mr. Trewin has been most informative. I shall walk there each morning while the gentlemen are out, until the shoot ends. You will not need to invent further errands for me. I shall invent my own. Miss Rouet." She folded it. She sealed it. She gave it to the housemaid and told her it was to be put on His Grace's writing desk. Then she sat in the window of the blue suite with the autumn sun on her hands, and she thought, "This is the first day. There are 41 more." She did not, this time, weep. The Dowager Duchess of Wolverston arrived on Friday. No one had warned Marigold. The carriage came up the drive at 4:30 in the afternoon, when the men were still out at the second drive of the day, and the first she knew of it was Mrs. Penhallow appearing in the doorway with a face that had gone the color of paper. "Miss Ashcombe, forgive me. Her Grace has come. His Grace's grandmother, from Bath. She has asked for tea. She has also asked for you. By name, miss. Has anyone sent for His Grace?" "A boy has gone, miss, but the second drive is 2 miles distant. It will be an hour at least." She smoothed her skirt. She went down. The great drawing room at Thornwell had been built to humble visiting kings. In the middle of all of it, on the largest of the silk-upholstered settees, sat a small, very upright old woman in black bombazine and a cap of Honiton lace, with a pair of pale gray eyes that were the exact eyes of her grandson, and a stick of black ebony laid across her knees. "Come here, child." Marigold came. She made the curtsy her Aunt Imogen had drilled into her at 14, and she rose, and she met the old woman's eyes. "You have your mother's mouth." Marigold blinked. "You knew my mother, ma'am?" "I knew her very well. We were presented in the same season. She was the prettier of us, which she had the good grace not to mention, and the cleverer, which she had the better grace not to mention either. I was extremely sorry when she died. Sit down, where I can see you properly." Marigold sat where she was bidden. "Now, we have perhaps 3/4 of an hour before my grandson gets back from his fields, so we shall be quick. Why are you in this house?" "Aye, my brother is sailing for Calcutta in 6 weeks, ma'am. We are gathered here for the autumn shoot before Cassian's departure." "Yes, that is what my grandson has told me, in 3 letters. It is also what is true. It is not, however, what I asked. Why are you in this house?" Marigold felt the blood move in her face. "I do not understand the question, ma'am." "Yes, you do." The dowager's stick lifted 1/2 inch off her knees and tapped once upon the floor. "I am very old, Miss Ashcombe, and I have not been wasting my time. My grandson has come down to this estate alone, 3 weeks before he was expected, and dismissed half his London engagements, and refused the company of the woman his late mother and I were on the point of selecting for him. I had a letter from Lady Carberry yesterday. It was the letter of a woman who has been very gently, very politely, and very absolutely refused. by a man who had given her every reason for the past 2 years to expect otherwise. The room was very quiet. I have come down from Bath because I do not believe in coincidences, and I have been informed that my grandson sat in his library on the night of your arrival until 3 o'clock in the morning, alone, in a state Mrs. Penhallow described as not himself and frightening to look upon. So I shall ask you again, child, why are you in this house? Marigold's hands were folded in her lap. She thought with a clarity that was almost peaceful. I cannot lie to her. She will know. She has known him longer than I have been alive. She lifted her head. Because my brother asked me, ma'am. Because His Grace has been kind to my family for a very long time. And because I made the mistake, when I was 16 years old, of falling in love with him, and I went to Vienna for 3 years to recover from it, and I came home believing I had, and on the night of my arrival, I discovered that I hadn't, and that he hadn't either. We have agreed, ma'am, His Grace and I, that for the duration of my brother's remaining time in England, we shall conduct ourselves as we always have, and that after my brother sails, His Grace will see me suitably married to someone else. The silence after this lasted a very long time. The fire cracked in the grate. The Dowager Duchess of Halverston laid both her hands upon the head of her stick, and she leaned forward very slightly, and she said, in a voice that was softer than any voice Marigold had yet heard from her, "Oh, you foolish, foolish child." Marigold lifted her chin. "Ma'am, No. You will let me speak now, and you will listen. What I am about to tell you, you will hear from no other living person. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." My grandson was 24 years old when his father died. His father was killed by a fall from a horse he had no business riding, on his way home from a woman he had no business loving. I do not mean a mistress, child. I mean a woman of his own rank, whose husband was a brute, and whom my son had loved since he was 19 years old, and never had, and never could have, and who was the reason that his marriage to my grandson's mother was the unhappy and dutiful thing it was. My grandson knew nothing of this until I had to explain it to him in the library of this house on the day of his father's funeral. I told him, that afternoon, that his father had loved a woman he could not have for 30 years, and had ruined his own life with it, and his wife's life with it, and that I wouldn't see that happen to my grandson. That if he ever found himself in his father's position, he was to declare himself, or absent himself, but he wasn't to do what his father had done. The old woman's pale eyes were very steady on Marigold's face. I believe he absented himself, as I told him to. I believe he has spent a decade absenting himself from a girl he had loved since she was 16, in the conviction that he was sparing her his father's mistake. And I believe he is now about to spend the next 6 weeks delivering her, with his own hands, to another man. And I believe, child, that it will kill him. Not all at once, but certainly, and slowly, and entirely. Marigold could not speak. "Do you love him, child?" "Yes, ma'am." "Knowing what you know now, knowing what it has cost him." "Do you love him?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then," the dowager's stick struck the floor once, "you will not marry another man, Miss Ashcombe. You will not allow my grandson to deliver you to one. I do not give a fig for your 6-week bargain, or his honor, or your brother's permission. I have buried a son for the want of someone speaking plainly to him. I do not propose to bury a grandson for the same reason. Do you understand me?" The drawing-room door opened. Vesper stood in it. He had come straight in from the field. His coat was wet at the shoulders. His boots were muddy, and he had, from the look on his face, heard the last sentence. The dowager turned her head. "Ah," she said pleasantly. "There you are. We have been having tea." The dowager stayed 3 days. She did not, in those 3 days, repeat to her grandson a single word of what she had said in the great drawing room. She presided over the dinner table each evening with the manners of a woman who had presided over the dinner tables of 2 prime ministers and a king, and she charmed Cassian, and she examined Lucien Devereux for precisely 20 minutes after dinner on the first evening, and never spoke a direct word to him again. On the morning of her departure, she stopped beside the camellia trees in the conservatory, and she set her stick into the gravel path, and she said, without turning her head, "He has not slept, I think, since I came. You will be careful, child. Of him, and of yourself." "Yes, ma'am." The carriage came at noon, and she was gone, and Vesper stood on the steps of Thornwell beside Marigold and Cassian, and watched her go down the drive, and Marigold did not need to look at him to know that his hands, behind his back, were locked together hard enough to bruise. The shoot ended on Saturday. Lord Wesley and Mr. Coomer departed on Sunday. Lucien Devereux did not. He had been invited by Cassian to remain at Thornwell through the 2nd week. "I shan't have a soul to talk to else, Halverston. You'll be locked up with your account books." And Vesper had inclined his head once, and said, of course, he is most welcome. Lucien Devereux was charming. That was the difficulty. He sat next to her at dinner. He read aloud to her in the evenings, when Cassian had drunk too much port, and gone heavy-eyed by the fire. He did not flirt with her. That was the cleverer thing about him. He treated her, with absolute consistency, as a young woman whose company he found extremely interesting, and whose hand he was not yet asking for. It was an immaculately conducted courtship, conducted for the benefit of Cassian, who beamed at the 2 of them across every meal, and for the benefit of Vesper, who watched and said nothing and grew thinner. She did not, in those days, have a single private word with him. He arranged it that way. It was exactly what they had agreed. She hated it. On the 8th night, a Wednesday, with rain again at the windows, she could not sleep. At some point past midnight, she rose and went down the stairs barefoot. The library door was open a finger's width. She stood in the corridor, in the dark, and she watched him through the gap. He was at the desk by the window, the lamp lit at his elbow. He was writing. There was a small stack of folded sheets at his left hand. Then he set down the pen. He folded the sheet he had just finished. He laid it on the stack with the others, and he reached into the drawer of the desk, and he took out a small box, a flat box of dark polished wood, with a brass clasp, and he opened it, and he placed the new letter inside, on top of what Marigold understood was a stack of folded sheets that filled the box almost to its lid. He closed the box. He locked it. He returned it to the drawer. He sat for a moment with his hand flat on the wood, above where he had locked it, and he closed his eyes. And his face in that instant was the face he had shown her in the foyer on the night of the rain, only worse, because he believed himself to be alone. He rose. He extinguished the lamp. He moved across the room toward the door, and Marigold stepped sideways into the alcove behind the long case clock and held her breath as he passed within a yard of her in the dark. When she did move, she moved into the library, and she went to the desk, and she opened the drawer. The box was there. It was locked, and she had no key, and she would not have used one if she had. But she lifted it out, and she set it on the desk, and she laid her palm flat upon its lid, and she understood what it was. She had counted at least 30 sheets in the stack. She suspected he had been writing them since she was 16, and that he had never sent a single one. She put the box back. She went up to the blue suite, and she did not sleep at all. That afternoon she went, as she had every afternoon since the dowager's departure, to the small library off the morning room, and she found, to her astonishment, that he was already there. He was at the bookshelves with his back to the door. He turned, and he saw her, and for a fraction of a second, he did not have time to assemble the expression he had been wearing for 9 days. What was beneath it was not anger, and not coldness, and not even sorrow. It was hunger. A perfectly bare and unguarded hunger, of a kind she had never seen on a human face, and it was gone in less than a heartbeat, replaced by his ordinary courteous mask. "Forgive me. I did not know you used this room in the afternoons. Don't go." He stopped. She closed the door behind her. Her hand was shaking on the handle. "Vesper, do not go. Please. I am not breaking our bargain. I am asking you for 10 minutes, in a room with the door closed, where you do not have to pretend. And I do not have to pretend." He did not move. For a long time, he did not move at all. Then he crossed the room, very slowly, as a man crosses a frozen river, and he sat down in the chair opposite her, and he looked at her, properly, and he said, very low, 10 minutes. The fire moved in the grate. "What were you reading?" she said. He looked down at the book still in his hand. He had forgotten it. "Dawn." "Aloud, or to yourself?" "To myself. Always to myself." "Will you read me one?" "Aloud? Whichever you have just put your finger on." He looked at her. There was something terrible in his face. There was also, she saw, something that wasn't fighting her. He opened the book. He turned a page. He read her a valediction. Forbidding mourning, in a voice she had not heard from him since she was 15, and he had read aloud at her father's deathbed. She sat with her hands in her lap and the late sun on her shoulder, and she did not weep, and he did not stop. And when he had finished, he closed the book very carefully and set it on the small table between them. The clock struck the quarter. He rose. "Thank you," she said. He did not answer. He bowed once, very slightly, and he left the room. When at last she rose, she found, on the small table where he had set down the book, a single folded sheet of paper that had not been there before. It had no seal. She opened it. There were 3 words on it, in his hand. "I am sorry." She held it for a moment. Then she folded it again, very carefully. She put it inside the cover of the Dawn. She replaced the Dawn on the shelf. Tomorrow, she thought, Lucien Devereux was to walk with her by the lake. She went up to dress for dinner. The lake at Thornwell lay a mile from the house, ringed by beeches that had been planted by Vesper's great-grandfather. There was a folly on the eastern shore, a small Greek temple of pale stone. The lake itself was deep and very cold, and on the afternoon of Marigold's walk, it lay perfectly still, under a sky the color of old pewter, with the first thin scrim of ice forming along the reedy margins. Cassian did not come. He had intended to. He had risen at 7, declared his intention of being the most useful chaperone in the history of English country walks, and had then, at 11:30, been called to the stable yard to inspect a foal that was not thriving and had not reappeared. He sent a boy up with apologies. "Go without me, Devereux. Take her. Mind the ice." And Marigold, who had been standing in the front hall in her pelisse, had felt the floor of her stomach drop very gently beneath her ribs. "He sends his apologies," she said, to Lucien Devereux, who was waiting on the gravel. "He has sent them with very great convenience to himself," Lucien said, and smiled. "Shall I send for Mrs. Penhallow to come with us?" She considered for perhaps 2 seconds. "No, it is a perfectly respectable hour, and a perfectly respectable distance, and a perfectly respectable man." He offered her his arm. She took it. They walked the long avenue down to the lake in the gathering cold, and Lucien talked to her, pleasantly, without the artificial gallantry she had found in London drawing rooms, about a book he had been reading, and a horse he was thinking of buying. Marigold, who had spent the previous 9 days locking her face into composure across dinner tables, found that she was, against her will, beginning to relax. That was the part, she thought, that was going to break her in the end. "Miss Ashcombe." They had reached the folly. He had stopped walking. "Mr. Devereux." Lucia, please." He turned to face her. He took both her hands gently, without presumption. "I am going to ask you something, and I beg you, before you answer, to permit me to say two things first. The first is that I have known I was going to ask since the second evening I sat at your brother's dinner table. The second," he paused, and she saw that he had gone slightly pale around the mouth, "is that I am not blind, Miss Ashcombe. I have seen what is in this house. I will not pretend that I have not. I do not know its history, and I do not ask. I only say that I am asking you with a perfect understanding that you may have a great deal to consider. Marigold Ashcombe, will you marry me?" The wind moved on the surface of the lake. A swan, very far out, lifted from the water and beat away over the trees. She gave him the only honest thing she had. "Lucienne? Thank you. Thank you for asking me as you ask me. I cannot answer you today. I shall ask you to give me until my brother sails." "I will give you," he said, "as long as you require." He raised her hand to his mouth. He kissed her glove. He didn't kiss her hand. There was, she thought afterward, something in the tact of that gesture that very nearly destroyed her on its own. They came up the avenue in the long late afternoon, and when Mrs. Penhallow took Marigold's police in the hall, Marigold understood, by the particular tightness of Mrs. Penhallow's mouth, that something had happened during her absence. "His Grace asks if you will go to him in the estate office, miss. He says it is not urgent." "Is my brother returned?" "Yes, miss. Lord Ashcombe is in his rooms. He has been with His Grace this past hour." She did not change. She did not pause. She went the length of the corridor in her walking dress, and she opened the door of the estate office before he had answered. He was alone, at the desk. He looked up when she came in, and he rose, and the look on his face was the look of a man who had received exactly the news he had been steeling himself for. "He has asked me," she said, before he could speak. "Yes." "I have not given him an answer." "You will." It was not a question. It was a statement, made by a man who had decided, between Cassian's leaving the room and her entering it, what he was going to do. "Vesper, sit down, Marigold, please." She sat. He did not. He came round the desk and stood by the fire with his hand on the mantel. "Cassian has been with me an hour. He sails, as you know, in 5 weeks now. He has asked me whether I think Devereux a suitable man. I have told him that I do. He has further asked me whether I would, in his absence, give him my word to see the matter through. I have given him that word. The bargain we made has now been made between him and me as well. There will be no further private interviews between us, Marigold. I shall be at your wedding. I shall give you, if you will permit me, into Devereux's hand." She looked at him. She looked at the line of his jaw, and the silver at his temple, and the careful stillness of his hand on the mantel, and she understood that he had decided to die, not in his body. He would go on, in his body, for another 40 years. But the other thing, the thing she had seen in the small library, when she had asked him to read her a poem, that thing he had decided to put away into a box and lock and never open again. "Marigold, please, do not." "I have not given him an answer. You will. Because Devereux is a good man, and he loves you already in the small way it has given him to love at this stage. Because your brother needs to sail for Calcutta, knowing that you are safe. Because of you. Because if I do not, you will spend the rest of your life sitting at that desk in the library, writing letters into a box, and you will not survive it." His face went white. "How do you? I saw you. 2 nights ago. I came down. I could not sleep. I saw you put a letter into the box and lock it. I did not open it, Vesper. I would not. But I saw it, and I have known how long. I have known how often." He turned away from her. He set both his hands upon the mantel. He bowed his head between them. For a very long time he did not speak. When he did, his voice was hardly a voice at all. Then you will marry him, Marigold, because if you do not, I have nothing, nothing to keep me from coming to you. And I am not strong enough for both of us anymore. I have been strong enough for 10 years. I cannot do another 6 weeks of it if you do not marry him. Vesper, marry him. The door opened. Cassian came in. He had never, in his life, knocked at a door in this house. He came in now with his coat half-buttoned and his hair on end, and the unguarded face of a man who knew nothing. Halverston, the fool. Oh. Mari. You're back. Come and tell us, then. He stopped. He looked at his sister. He looked at his oldest friend, whose back was still turned, whose hands were still upon the mantel. He looked back at his sister. The smile slipped from his face by degrees, as a man's smile slips when he sees for the first time the thing that has always been in front of him, and which he has always been too generous of nature to see. Mari, he said, and his voice was different. Cassian. She rose. Cassian, please. Halverston. Vesper turned. Cassian, he said, and his voice was perfectly even. I owe you an explanation. Yes, said her brother. I rather think you do. He told him. He told him at the desk in the estate office, with Marigold standing by the fire and the autumn dusk moving slowly down the lawn outside the window. He did not spare himself. He told Cassian that he had been in love with his sister since the summer she was 16, and that his grandmother had warned him, when he was 24, against doing what his father had done, and that he had absented himself, and that it had nearly broken him, and that he had agreed 9 days ago to a bargain by which he would deliver her safely into another man's hand, and that he was prepared to honor that bargain. Cassian heard him out without speaking. When Vesper had finished, Cassian stood for a moment quite still, his hand on the back of a chair, and then he said, Mari, leave us. Cassian, leave us, Mari. Please, I shall come up to you in an hour. She looked at her brother. She looked at Vesper. Vesper did not lift his eyes. She went out of the room, and she walked, with a calmness that surprised her, the length of the corridor, and up the stairs, and into the blue suite, and she shut the door, and she sat down on the edge of the bed, and she folded her hands together very tightly in her lap, and she waited. It was nearer 2 hours than 1 when Cassian came up. He did not knock. He came in, and he closed the door behind him, and he sat down opposite her on the small chair by the window, and he looked at her for a long moment without speaking, and Marigold saw, with an ache she had not been prepared for, that her brother had been weeping. Not just then, some time since. He had washed his face, but she had grown up beside him. She could see. Mari. Yes. How long have you loved him? Since I was 12. It became the thing it is, perhaps when I was 16. And you went to Vienna because of him. Yes. And you came home because of him. I came home because you wrote and asked me to. Yes. But I wrote and asked you to, because he asked me to. It was his idea, Mari. He came to me in town in August and said he thought it would do me good before Calcutta to have you home for the autumn. I thought it was kindness. I did not know. God, Mari, I did not know what I was bringing you into. Cassian. No. Listen to me. He has been my closest friend since we were 9 years old. I have loved him as well as I have loved you. And I have sat in our houses for 10 years, and I have not seen what was in front of me. Because he did not let you. Because he is the most disciplined man you have ever known. He has been sparing all of us, Mari, from everything, for 10 years, including from himself. She nodded. Cassian put his face in his hands. After a while, he said, without looking up, Devereaux has asked you, hasn't he? This afternoon, by the lake. And you said, I asked him for time, until you sail. And what does Halverston wish you to do? He wishes me to accept Lucian. And what do you wish you to do? She did not answer at once. She rose instead. She walked to the window, where the dusk was now full, and she set her palm against the cold pane. I wish to be told by my brother that whatever I do, when my brother sails for Calcutta in 5 weeks, he will not sail, believing he has lost 2 of the people he loves most in the world. She did not turn. She heard him rise from his chair. She heard him cross the room. She felt him put his arms around her from behind, the way he had used to when they were children. Mari, you absolute idiot. You absolute, beautiful idiot, of course. Whatever you do. I love him too. Did you not understand? I love him too, in the way men love their friends, which is a real way, and I am not going to lose him. We are not going to lose him. Whatever you decide. She nodded, with her eyes shut against the window. Good. Will you tell me one thing? If I had not opened that door this afternoon, would you have married Devereux? She thought about it for a long time. Yes, I would have. Because I asked it of him, Cassian. I made him promise. And I didn't know how to make him not break, except by giving him something he could not break inside of. And you would have broken instead. Yes. Mari, you cannot make a bargain of that sort, with anyone, especially with him. I know that now. He turned her around, gently, by her shoulders. Listen to me. I am going to go down. He's in the library. I am going to tell him that he has my permission to address you, and my blessing if you will have him, and that I shall not sail for Calcutta until I have stood up at his side at his wedding. And tomorrow morning, Mari, you are going to give Lucien Devereux your answer, which will be no, and you will be kind to him, and he will understand. She nodded. She could not speak. He kissed her forehead. He went out. She heard him go down the long corridor and down the stair, with the heavy, definite step of a man who had a thing to do and meant to do it. And she heard the library door open and close, 2 floors down, very faintly. And then she heard nothing more. She sat down on the bed. She put her hands over her face. For the first time in 10 years, Marigold Ashcombe wept properly, in the quiet of her childhood bedroom, and the man she had loved since she was a child sat in a library 2 floors below her hearing, perhaps for the first time in his life, that he had been forgiven. When she had stopped weeping, she went to the writing desk, and she wrote a letter to Lucien Devereux. She thanked him for his proposal and the consideration that had been visible in every line of his behavior. She told him that she could not accept him. She did not refer to Vesper. She did not need to. He had told her, by the lake, that he was not blind. She sealed it. She undressed. She got into bed. Somewhere very far below, the long case clock struck 11, and Marigold lay awake in the dark and waited for a morning she had been waiting for, in some way she had never permitted herself to understand since she was 12 years old. She slept, perhaps, an hour near morning. She rose before Mrs. Penhallow's tap at the door. She dressed in the green wool, the gown she had worn the night of her arrival, and she did her own hair, simply, plaited at the back of her neck. She went down at 8:30. The breakfast room was empty. That was the first wrong thing. Cassian was always in the breakfast room by 8. The room was laid. The chocolate pot was hot. Her own cup had been set at her place, but there was no Cassian, and there was no Vesper, and there was no Lucien Devereux either. 3 places had been laid. None of them had been used. She rang the bell. Mrs. Penhallow came at once, and her face, when she came in, was the face of a woman who had been waiting for the bell for some time. "Where is my brother?" "Lord Ashcombe rode out at first light, miss, with Mr. Devereux. They have gone to the village. There has been some difficulty with one of the tenants. Mr. Devereux offered to ride with him." "At first light? Without breakfast?" "Yes, miss." Marigold set her hand on the back of the chair. "And his grace?" His Grace, miss. His Grace is gone. To London. He left a letter for you. He left 2 letters, in fact. One for you and one for Lord Ashcombe. He rode out at 6. He took only Hawken with him. The room receded slightly. May I have my letter, please? Yes, miss. It is in the small library. She walked, in a perfectly steady manner, the length of the corridor to the small library, and she opened the door, and she closed it behind her, and she crossed to the small table by the fire, and there it lay. A folded sheet, sealed this time, with his ring, in red wax. Her name was on the front in his hand. She broke the seal. Marigold, by the time you read this, I shall be on the London road. Your brother and I spoke last night. He has done what I told him not to do, which is to give us his blessing. He did so out of love for both of us, and out of the conviction that the harder course is the one we ought to be permitted to choose. I cannot, however, permit it. I have thought of every reason I had to refuse you 10 years ago. They are still good reasons. You know them. But there is one I did not tell you. I have not been strong enough, Marigold, since the day you came down the steps of Thornwell into the rain. I have been holding by my fingernails to a thing I made myself promise 10 years ago, and you were never the danger to it. I was. And the only way I can keep that promise to myself, and keep my word to your brother, who deserves a friend who keeps his word, is to put a distance between us that this country cannot supply. I am going to London, and from London to Lisbon. I have business there that may detain me a year, perhaps 18 months. I shall not write to you. I have written you enough letters that I never sent. They are in a box in the drawer of the library desk. I have left the key with Mrs. Penhallow. They are yours. Burn them. Do not read them. If you read them, I shall not have done what I am attempting to do, which is to give you a life. Marry Marigold. Not Devereux, if it is not him. Someone. You are 24 years old, and you have a heart larger than this country. Do not waste it on the absence of a man who has loved you badly for a decade. I have loved you since you were 16. I shall love you until I die. I shall not, however, take you. You have been very brave for me, Marigold. Permit me to be, this once, brave for you. Voilà. She read it through once. She read it through a second time. She did not weep. She had been wrong about everything. She had thought the worst he could do was tell her to marry Lucien Devereux. She had not understood that there was another worse thing, which was to leave her the right to refuse. She folded the letter. She put it inside the cover of the Dawn, where the slip of paper from 2 evenings ago still lay. She rang the bell. Mrs. Penhallow came at once. The housekeeper had been crying. He has left a key for me. With you. Yes, miss. The housekeeper drew it from the chain at her waist. A small brass key, very plain. She laid it in Marigold's hand, with the gentleness of a woman handing over something that had cost a great deal. Thank you. How long ago did they leave? It will be nearly 3 hours, miss. And the road to London. 6 hours, miss, in good weather. Marigold did not move for a moment longer. Then she said, Mrs. Penhallow, send to the stables. Tell them to put my mare to the lightest gig. Tell them I shall require Bates and a fresh team to be sent ahead to the post house at Reading. Tell Bates we shall stop only to change horses, and that I shall pay him triple his usual rate. Tell him to be at the door in 20 minutes. Then come up to the blue suite and help me change. Mrs. Penhallow, 20 minutes. The housekeeper looked at her. Then, very slowly, the old woman's face set into something that was not a smile, but was not anything less than one. And she said, Yes, miss, 20 minutes, and she went out at a pace that, in a woman of her age, was nearly a run. She did not, in the end, go to the desk drawer. She did not open the box of letters. He had asked her not to. She put the brass key in her reticule. She went up the stairs to the blue suite, and 20 minutes later, Exactly. Marigold Ashcombe walked down the front steps of Thornwell Park into the cold pewter morning, and Bates lifted her into the gig, and the team went up the drive at a pace that scattered the gravel, and she did not look back at the house once. The London road was very long. It was very cold. She did not weep on it. She had 10 years of weeping behind her, and she was going to spend none of it on this. She did not catch him on the road. The gig was light, the horses were fresh, and Bates drove with the ferocious, patient skill of a man who had been told that a great lady needed something done quickly. They came into the outskirts of London at 20 minutes past 5 in the afternoon. His house in Mount Street was shut. The shutters were closed. The footman who answered her at last was not Hawken. "His Grace is not in residence, miss. He left for Portsmouth 2 hours ago. The Lisbon packet sails on the morning tide." She stood on the steps, and she understood that he had not even slept in his own bed. He had bought himself, by the few hours of his head start, the impossibility of being caught. Bates was at the foot of the steps with the gig. "Portsmouth, miss?" "How far?" 70 miles, miss. Through the night, with a fresh team at Guildford and another at Petersfield. Perhaps 8 hours. The packet, they sail with the tide. I'd not pretend to know what hour exactly." She did not think for long. "My brother's house is in Bruton Street. Take me there." Cassian's house was lit and warm, and entirely surprised to see her. Marigold went into the small parlor, sat down at the writing desk, and wrote 3 letters in 20 minutes. One to Cassian at Thornwell, telling him exactly what had happened, and exactly what she meant to do. One to the Dowager in Bath, and one, very short, to Mrs. Penhallow, asking her to keep the box of letters safe. She sealed all 3. She gave them to Cassian's footman. Then she rang. She asked the housekeeper for hot soup, dry stockings, a fresh pair of gloves, a heavy lap rug, and a pistol, if there happened to be one in the house. Mrs. Carew, a sensible Welshwoman who had been with Cassian since Oxford, did not blink. "There is a small one, miss. That was your father's. I shall have it cleaned and loaded. Will you eat first?" "I shall eat in the gig. I cannot stop." "Miss, you will forgive my asking. Is this a matter of life or death?" "Yes, Mrs. Carew, I think it is." "Then the Lord be with you, miss." She ate in the gig. Bates drove out of London at 6:30 in the evening. Marigold Ashcombe, who had never before in her life done anything of the kind, set out alone through the night for a port she had never seen, to stop a man she had loved for 10 years from leaving the country. It rained at Guildford. It cleared at Petersfield. She did not sleep. She sat upright with the rug at her chin and her eyes on the dark road, and she thought of every single thing he had ever said to her in her life, and she put each one of them in its proper place. The sky began to gray near 5 o'clock in the morning. They came down into Portsmouth at 7, with the gulls already up over the masts in the harbor, and the smell of the sea heavy on the cold air. And Bates drew rein at the head of the High Street, and turned in his seat, and said, with a hoarseness that was not from the cold, "Miss, the packet for Lisbon. There she is. She has not yet weighed anchor. She will, I'd say, within the half-hour." The packet stood half a mile out, a small, fast ship under bare yards, lying at the edge of the morning haze, with the first thin white line of foam at her bow, where the tide had begun to set against her cable. "A boat," Marigold said. "Bates. A boat. Now." He sprang down. He was, she discovered then, more than a coachman. He had been a sailor in his youth, and within 4 minutes, he had a waterman at the steps below the Sally Port. And Bates was lifting her down into the boat with the absolute, careful grip of a man who had been told that the next 10 minutes were everything. "Pull, man," he said to the waterman. "Pull for the packet." 5 guineas, Marigold said. "Pull, as you have never pulled in your life." The waterman pulled. They cleared the breakwater, They came out into the chop of the spit, and the cold spray came up over the bow, and Marigold sat in the stern with her hood blown back and her hand white on the gunwale, and she watched the packet grow from a small, clean shape in the haze into a great wooden wall above her, and she heard, from her deck, the cry of an officer giving orders, and the windlass beginning to clack. "Hello," she shouted. Her voice was thin in the wind. "Hello, the packet." A face appeared at the rail. "Hello there. Boat ahoy. I must speak with one of your passengers, the Duke of Halverston. It is a matter of the gravest urgency." The face at the rail considered her for perhaps 3 seconds. "Wait there, miss." The face withdrew. A face appeared. It wasn't at first his. It was Hawken, who had been Vesper's man for 18 years, who had carried Marigold on his shoulders when she was 4. Hawken's face went, in the instant of his seeing her, the color of paper. He turned. He spoke, behind him, to someone she could not see. He turned back. "Miss Ashcombe. Hawken. Please. Please. Miss Ashcombe, His Grace has given orders. He cannot. Hawken." And then the face she had been waiting for was at the rail besides Hawken's. It was white. It was unshaven. It was the face of a man who had not slept in 2 nights and had been preparing, in the last minute of those 2 nights, to lift the anchor of his life out of England. He saw her, and for a long moment he did not speak. He hadn't in any of his calculations imagined this. He had built his entire morning on the assumption that a young lady of 24 years did not, in this country, in this century, drive through a night alone to a port in a hired gig, and shout up the side of a packet at her sailing. He had been wrong about her. Marigold. His voice carried down to her, just on the cold wind. "Vesper Halverston," she called back. Her own voice was steadier than she had any right to expect. "I have come to give you back your letters." She lifted, from her lap, the small black valise. She had not taken his letters from the box. She had not opened the box. The valise contained only 3 of her own gowns, a comb, a Bible that had been her mother's, and a single sheet of paper, folded inside the Bible, with 3 words on it in his hand. "I am sorry." She held the valise up. "I have come to tell you," she said, "that you do not have my permission, sir, to be sorry. You do not have my permission to go to Lisbon. You do not have my permission to give me a life. I have a life, Vesper. I have brought it with me. It is in this boat. Will you permit me, please, to bring it on board your ship?" He stared down at her for what was, perhaps, 3 seconds. Then he turned. He spoke, briefly and very low, to the officer at the rail beside him. The officer touched his hat. The officer turned and shouted, in a voice that carried clear across the deck, "Avast the windlass! Hold her fast!" The clacking of the windlass stopped. "Hawken, the ladder, now!" The pilot ladder uncoiled down the side of the packet with a soft hiss and struck the water beside the boat, and Marigold rose from the stern thwart with the valise in one hand, and she set her foot on the first rung, and she climbed. She climbed in a green wool gown, with her hair coming out of its plait, alone, up the side of a Lisbon packet at 7:30 in the morning, with the whole of Portsmouth Harbor watching from the quay. He was at the rail when she came up over it. He took the valise from her. He took her hand. He set her on the deck of his ship. He did not speak. He had stopped, she thought, being able to. She stood in front of him on the cold deck, and she put her hand against his cheek. There, in front of Hawken and the officer of the watch and 4 staring sailors, and she said, "You are coming home, Vesper. You are coming home with me." He bowed his head into her palm. She felt him, in the last second before he closed his eyes, begin at last to weep. They were married at Thornwell, in the small chapel on the estate, 6 weeks later, on a clear, cold morning 4 days before Christmas, with the frost lying thick on the south lawn, and Cassian, who had agreed, with very little persuasion, to delay his sailing for Calcutta until the spring, standing at his oldest friend's side as groomsman with an expression that wavered, throughout the ceremony, between profound dignity and the wet-eyed grin of a man who could not believe his own happiness. The dowager wore lavender. She had retired from full mourning 2 months earlier than she had planned, because the occasion had demanded it. Mr. Lucien Devereux did not attend. He sent a letter of warm congratulations, a piece of Sèvres porcelain that had belonged to his mother, and the news that he had become engaged to a Miss Hardacre of Northumberland, whom he had known for some years, and to whom, upon reflection, after his return from Berkshire, he had discovered himself to be very deeply attached. Marigold folded the letter carefully and put it away, and she thought, with a tenderness she had not quite expected, that Lucien Devereux had been a kind man to the last. The chapel was small. Mrs. Penhallow, in the back pew, weeping into a handkerchief that Hawken, beside her, kept handing back to her each time she dropped it. Mr. Trewin in his Sunday black, with a buttonhole he had grown himself. Lord Westley, a handful of cousins, the vicar who had baptized Vesper at this same font 34 years before. She walked the length of the aisle on her brother's arm, in a gown of cream silk and old lace that had been her mother's, with a small posy of white roses. Mr. Trewin had brought up that morning out of his glass house, and her hand on Cassian's was perfectly steady, and Cassian's hand, beneath hers, was not steady at all. "Mari," he whispered, once, halfway down the aisle. "Mari, I cannot. Give me a moment." "Cassian, it is only Vesper. It has only ever been Vesper. We are giving him to no one we have not always given him to." Her brother choked on a small noise that was half laugh and half sob, and he composed his face by main force, and he delivered her to the man at the altar. Vesper did not weep at the altar. He had wept, 6 weeks earlier, on the deck of a Lisbon packet, and that had been enough. He stood at the altar with the silver at his temple catching the candlelight, and he took her hand from her brother's, and he held it, all through the vows and the ring, with the careful, immaculate competence of a man who had finally, after 10 years, been permitted to hold the thing he had been refusing himself. "I take thee," he said to her. His voice did not shake. "I take thee, Marigold Ashcombe, to my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward." She did not weep. She had wept only twice in the 6 weeks since Portsmouth, once in the gig coming back, with his coat around her shoulders, and once, 3 weeks afterward, when she had sat on the floor of the library, with the brass key in her hand and the box of letters open in her lap, and had wept for the boy he had been at 24 when he had locked away the first one. "As long as we both shall live. As long as we both shall live." Vesper put the ring on her finger. He bent his head, and he kissed her, decorously, and Marigold heard, very faintly, somewhere behind her. Cassian let out a long breath he had been holding for what may, by his accounting, have been 10 years. It was done. The wedding breakfast was at Thornwell. The dowager presided. When Cassian rose to give the toast, in a wavering voice that he steadied, with visible effort, halfway through, the dowager raised her glass and said, very quietly, to no one in particular, "It was about time, my dears. It was about time." Mr. Trewin, who had been given a glass of champagne and was not certain what to do with it, drank his whole glass at once, and then sat very pink and surprised. Mrs. Penhallow wept again into Hawken's handkerchief. Hawken did not, on this occasion, ask for the handkerchief back. It was very late that night when they came at last to the library. The dowager had been escorted upstairs at 10:30. Cassian had drunk a great deal of champagne and had been put to bed by Hawken in his old room. Vesper opened the library door for her. He closed it behind them. The fire was lit in the hearth, The lamp was lit at the desk. The box of letters lay where they had left it that afternoon, with the brass key in its lock, and beside it lay the volume of Dawn. Marigold stood in the middle of the room, in her cream silk and her mother's lace. "Vesper, come and sit by the fire." He came. He sat on the small settee. She sat down beside him. She did not, this time, take the chair opposite. And she leaned against his shoulder, which was the shoulder she had wanted to lean against since the summer she was 16 years old and hadn't been permitted to, and his arm came round her, and they sat for a long time looking into the fire. "I have something to give you," he said at last. "I have had everything I want from you, given to me already today, sir." "Even so." He put his hand into the breast of his coat. He took out a small, flat object wrapped in tissue. He laid it in her lap. She unwrapped it. It was a miniature in a small oval frame of silver, very old. A portrait of a girl, perhaps 16 years of age, in a white muslin gown and a sash of pale blue, with dark hair plaited at the back of her neck, and a half-smile of a kind one paints when one has been told to sit still for an hour, and the painter had caught her exactly, even to the small private mockery in the corner of her mouth. It was Marigold at 16. "Vesper, my mother had it painted. Of you, the summer you turned 16. She gave it to me on my 24th birthday, 3 weeks before she died. She did not say anything when she gave it to me. She did not need to. I have carried it since. You carried it." "Where?" "In my coat, the breast pocket. Always. I did not always look at it, Marigold. I could not always afford to look at it. But I carried it." He paused. "Forgive me. There are perhaps things one ought not to confess to one's wife on the night of one's wedding. Vesper Halverston." "Yes." "You absolute idiot." "Yes." She kissed him properly this time, not the decorous chapel kiss, but the kiss of a woman who had been waiting for 10 years to be permitted to do it, and his hand came up against her cheek, and the miniature lay between them in her lap, and they did not, for some considerable while, say anything at all. The Dowager Duchess of Halverston lived another 7 years. She saw 2 great-grandchildren, a boy and a girl, and she said of the boy that he had his great-grandfather's hands, and of the girl that she had her mother's mouth, and she was, on the whole, satisfied. Cassian Ashcombe sailed for Calcutta in the spring of the year following the wedding. He returned 3 years after, very brown and slightly thinner, and engaged to a young widow he had met in Madras, and the wedding was held at Thornwell, with Marigold's daughter, then aged 2, scattering rose petals down the aisle. Mrs. Penhallow was still housekeeper at Thornwell on the day she died, with the Duchess herself sitting at the foot of the bed. Mr. Trowan's white roses, which he had crossed and recrossed for 30 years, were named, by him, Marigold Halverston, and won the gold medal at the Royal Horticultural Show in the year before his death. The box of letters in the desk drawer was, in time, read all the way through. None of them was burned. They were kept in the box, locked with the brass key. And the key, when at last Marigold and Vesper themselves were old, was given by them to their daughter, with the box and with the Dawn, and with the small slip of paper that had once said, "I am sorry," and with the strict instruction that none of it was ever to be burned. And every year, on the 18th of November, the Duke of Halverston and his Duchess took a walk down the long avenue to the lake. They walked it slowly when they were young, and more slowly when they were old, and at the folly of Pale Stone, they stopped, always, and looked at the water, and went on. They did not speak in those moments of Lucienne Devereux, or of Lisbon packets, or of cold mornings in Portsmouth Harbor. They did not need to. They had, by then, the rare privilege, granted to those who have come very near to losing one another, and have not, of standing in a place that had once held a possible disaster, and finding in it, now, only the long quiet of a thing that has been, at last, lived through. Thank you for being here. Thank you for staying with these two. Through 10 years of silence, through one storm at a front door, through one hard bargain in a small study, through one ride to a port in the dark, and for permitting them, at last, to find each other across a piece of cold water. If this story moved you, if it stayed with you, if you have ever loved someone you did not know how to say it to, I hope it gave you something. A small permission, perhaps, a reminder that the words we did not say in time may still, sometimes, be said. That the years we thought lost may sometimes, by some grace, not have been. If you would like more stories of this kind, of slow-burning love, of long restraint and longer courage, of Regency hearts that finally speak, please consider subscribing to the channel. Tell me in the comments which moment of this story you carry with you. The rain at Thornwell, the poem in the small library, the pilot ladder in Portsmouth Harbor. I read every one of them. You are the reason these stories exist. Thank you for letting me tell them. Until the next one.